Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show, bringing you not one, but two really great guests today involved in some extremely important areas, helping to create a better tomorrow for many people out there. Today, we are first joined by Jermonica Boardley, who is the president and CEO of Savad Diagnostic Medical Group, which is a minority-owned company. They're dedicated to addressing the unique needs of underserved and unserved communities throughout the United States, as well as globally. And they most recently announced the launch of HarmGuard FX, which is a single low-toss strip that helps provide affordable, reliable way for people to test substances for fentanyl and xylazine, popularly known on the street now as Tranq, to really dangerous adulterants that are exacerbating the critical opioid crisis that we have in the country today. Ms. Boardley is a graduate of Delaware State University. She brings over 20 years of experience, diverse corporate leadership to this current role as president and CEO, and her experience spans across accounting, finance, human resources, communications, and DE&I. We're also joined today by Joseph Scrocco. He's president and CEO of Diagnostic Solutions Group. They're the developer of HarmGuard FX, and their company has developed custom diagnostic solutions for the last 25 years, ranging from complex mass screening for blood banks to individual point-of-care testing, and have been involved with many clients, including J&J, Pfizer, Novo, a variety of governments around the world, hospitals, urgent care centers, long-term care facilities. Joe has a master's in information systems at NYU, master's in neurophysiology from UMDNJ. Two really great guests, a lot of important themes to get into. Jermonica Boardley, Joe Scrocco, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's awesome having both of you. Before we get into these serious topics, I'd love to, as we typically do, hand both of you the mic for a few minutes just to talk a little bit more about yourselves. Jermonica, I noticed that you had spent time at DuPont. You were involved in health and nutrition. You're involved in the international fragrance and flavors business. What got you interested in heading out of a major corporate situation there and getting into the CEO and president role of this fascinating startup?
Wow, you really did your research. Thank you. I think you addressed it very well in the introduction. I'm originally from Irvington, New Jersey, proud graduate of Delaware State University. As you mentioned, got my bachelor's in accounting. Went to go work for a dynamic company in DuPont for 21 years, where they were really focused on innovation and science and technology. So that really built a desire in me to really try to come up with solutions that really could help people protect the planet, and ultimately save lives. Many different experiences there at DuPont, as you mentioned. Towards the end of my career, I got really involved in a lot of DE&I initiatives and really just tried to work to implement DE&I more into the company's core processes and practices, and facilitating numerous training sessions for all the employees and senior leadership and managers and things of that nature. So I've always had a desire to really want to make an impact and do as much as I can to impact as many lives as possible and have a positive influence on individuals' lives. So with COVID, and everything that happened during COVID, I just really did a self-assessment on myself and my career and what was it that I really wanted from life? What is it that I really wanted to do with my life? I had a great career at DuPont, but I really wanted to do more. I really wanted to do more in the area of underserved and unserved communities and more in our Black and Brown communities. So at that time, I connected with Savad, who was involved in a lot of different initiatives where their mission really was to try to have a bigger impact in those communities. So at that time, I made the really hard decision to leave DuPont after 21 years and join the Savad team.
Awesome. And Joe, as I mentioned in the bio, you spent time learning about IT and neurophysiology, and you became a serial entrepreneur yourself. Talk a little bit about yourself, Joe, a little bit of your background and how you eventually got into the sort of the diagnostic space.
Started my business right after grad school. My first major project was with Hoffman LaRoche because they were in Nutley, New Jersey at the time. And I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. With my background in neurophysiology and business and also in internet technology, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. So I took the master's in internet technology, which was brand new in like 92, 93. No one had even heard of it. And when I went to NYU, they had just built a new lab, and it was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. I was using like AOL. It was taking 4 hours to download an image, and there we had fiber optic, and we were downloading massive images in seconds and software. So I said, this is the future. I mean, there's no two ways about it. So how can I combine science and technology and do something? So the opportunity at Roche came along, and they asked me to go and be interviewed by their IT group first. Well, of course, they knew nothing about, at the time, about internet. And so I passed right away, and they gave us the first major project. And from that point on, we got very heavily involved as consultants in pharmaceuticals and diagnostics. We've done a lot of work with Pfizer, with Johnson & Johnson, with Novo Nordisk, one of our large clients now, on type 2 diabetes, type 1 diabetes, also on weight loss with, say, drugs like Wegovy. And what happened was, and we worked a lot with like orthoclinical diagnostic on some very rare spirochetes, things like that. Mm-hmm. And so one of them was called Chagas. I don't know if you know what it is, but it's
sure.
Oh, you know. Okay, great.
I had Peter Hotez on the show talking about it a couple of months ago.
All right. Well, that was I worked a lot on Chagas. It was very interesting with the Red Cross developing a low-cost test for screening. So, a lot of people never heard of it. So then what happened was during COVID, and I have an office in China. I have one in Costa Rica and one in Canada. So what happened was during COVID, a lot of the pharmaceutical company activity slowed down because obviously they didn't know what to do. They didn't know what the future held. So what we did was we got very heavily involved in COVID on the diagnostic side. And I didn't have a huge amount of experience with rapid diagnostics, mostly PCR, the bigger things. So we got a lot of experience during the COVID period, rapid. And then I was working with a company in South Jersey, and they developed a combination test for COVID, influenza A and B. And so I started looking into multi-analyte tests, and I said, this is great. You can do 2 or 3 analytes in the same amount of time as one. And then back then we were worrying about CPT codes and reimbursement, and it all worked out great, right? So what we did was we decided to, I met Lindsay Davis, who's the principal, one of the principals of Savad, through COVID. We were back selling products. And so Lindsay said to me, listen, I'd really like to work with you guys. We had a great relationship. What more can we do? So we had a couple of meetings with the Lieutenant Governor of Delaware, and they were talking a lot about harm reduction. I had worked in harm reduction in the 90s at Hoffman LaRoche when we did the first protease inhibitor, sequinavir, and they were doing needle exchange programs. So I started working a little bit. So I understood the basic concepts of it. So we had meetings with them. We did focus groups and the rest. And we said, this is great. And then Tranq was coming big. So I said, why wouldn't it be great if we could come up with a test that would do both at the same time on the same low-cost test strip in 5 minutes? Because from the IT background and user experience, we know that nobody is going to do 2 tests separately. They're going to look for Tranq and then wait and not take the drug. It's not going to happen. So if we can get them all together, we'll have a much better user experience, and the percentage of people who use it will go way up. We know that. Just like a website, 1 click, a lot of use. 3, 4 clicks, it's way down. No 2 ways about it from user experience. So that's what we did. We work with one of the largest companies in China to develop it. They have a great R&D department, and all they do is rapid tests. They do rapid tests for everything. And so we work with them to develop it. We had a couple of snags up front trying to combine the two, but we did. We got them combined on one test strip. And then we just launched it 2 weeks ago in Delaware, which was the initial launch. And now the pilot went very well, and they're starting to reorder tests. And now we're going to make it available widely to the entire United States. And then we've been to Nigeria, we've been to Togo and several other places with Savad, working on other projects like malaria and sickle cell, thalassemia, things like that. So we have contacts there. So I'm thinking this would, and they all have the same problem. I mean, it's amazing. And the other thing we've done, which is really interesting, is I developed a great relationship with a couple of major labs in Spain and Western Europe, who actually do something which Philly is now doing. They, once a week or once a month, they ask people with inactive addiction to come in and bring their drugs. They'll test them for free, but you have to leave behind so they can figure out what's creeping into the supply, because they actually have street drugs. Right. And it's done with complete impunity. So you have to worry about cops or anything else. And so the labs in Europe always seem to know maybe 6 months to a year in advance what's starting to come in as an adulterant. And so we're looking now for the future. What's the next, if fentanyl falls out of favor, what's the next one that they're going to be adding in? And our job is to stay on top of it. The other thing I wanted just to add, which I think is extremely important, we developed something called iPort or HS, and it uses natural language processing. And so it's going to be available very shortly. So if you look at the packet that the test comes in, there's a QR code on it. And so when you scan the QR code, you use advanced geolocation plus generative AI to start a conversation. So let's say you got the test strips in Maine, but you flew to California using them there. As long as California is a participating state, you're going to get exact resources in California that are relevant to you, and they're going to be sorted by distance from exactly where you are. So, because one of the problems people run into today is there's so much information. A lot of it's not accurate, but there's so much information. So if you go to a state website and try to find exactly what you're looking for quickly, it's going to be tough to find it. It can take you hours to find something, especially what we're learning since the age demographic is coming down now, and a lot of kids in high school and early college years are dying of fentanyl and xylazine. And the reason, of course, is that their receptors are naive to opioids. And so when you're naive to opioid, even a small amount, as you know, makes a huge difference. As you get more and more experience, you have the mu opioid receptors become less and less, and you need more and more. They become internalized, and you need more and more drug. But the kids need so little. So they get something like, let's say, Quaalude online, and they think it's real. It looks just like it. They make it look just like it. Now, if it's a real Quaalude, it's not going to have fentanyl in it. But if it's not, we need the tiniest amount will knock these kids dead in 2 seconds. So the idea here is to be, to really look at the markets and see how can we give them information using the iPortal to let them know that they could see like an experienced drug user and see these guys are taking a lot of it and they don't die, but you're going to die from a very small amount of it. And parents need to know that, school administrators need to know that based on your level of sensitivity to opioids, a small amount will make a huge difference to a young person. An experienced person will take 10 times more. So they can't look at an experienced person and maybe selling to them and say, oh yeah, I do this all the time. Well, maybe you do, but if the kid did it, it's not going to be a good scene at all. Right. So that's how we got into it. I think iPortal, as we get more and more states involved, Delaware is funding the program now. And so they have needle exchange in there. They have naloxone in there, free and paid. You can find out exactly where it is immediately. They have also a mobile unit that comes around so that we know exactly where it is every day. So it tells you when you log in, it tells you where it's going to be, how close it's going to be to you. So we have a lot of that. And then we have Delaware-wide programs built in too, which would be counseling programs, intervention programs, things like that. So the idea would be to try to give concise, immediate, relevant information to people who need it when they need it, which is right now.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the information, so in terms of the DEA and sort of where we are. And again, thinking back, because I was a child of the late 60s, early 70s. And, back in the day, we were talking about the drugs. We weren't talking about all the bad stuff in the drugs. And, it's just a perverse situation we find ourselves in. Jermonica, you're in Delaware. Joe, you're in Jersey, and I'm in between you in Philadelphia.
Actually,
All right.
yeah.
Okay. And it's sad to say here in the city of brotherly love, a couple miles that way is the largest open air drug market in the country. And people drive around and make YouTube videos, millions of views. Just it's crazy what's happening over there. Talk about, just if we have a couple of minutes, sort of your own geographical experience. I know, Jermonica, you're in Delaware, and you had this amazing success with the local government there and rolling this out. But what's the current 2023 situation in your neck of the woods in terms of this opiate, fentanyl, xylazine problem as we're talking right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2022, Delaware reported their highest number of opioid-related deaths when they reported 537 in 2022, and they were seeing an uptick then in the number of deaths involving xylazine, but 80% of those deaths definitely were related to fentanyl. And even, just to dive down a little bit more deeper within the Black community, there was an increase of 29% as well, and there was an increase in the ages of 51 to 60 years old of individuals who died for the opioid overdose. And we're trending in 2023 in the same direction, so we really needed to get ahead of this as quickly as possible. And that's why we really commend the Lieutenant Governor of Delaware by really accepting a call to action to really do something here locally in the state of Delaware, recognizing that Philadelphia is in close proximity and xylazine was showing up in 90% of the street drugs, there. We knew that we had to get ahead of it here in Delaware as it was emerging here. So we wanted to get ahead of it, before the 4th of July weekend, when that's in previous years been a time when there's an increase in overdoses, an increase in drug use in general. So we really wanted to launch and do this pilot ahead of the 4th of July weekend, as we prepare for the rest of the year to hopefully make an impact and save some lives where we won't have to report 537 or more. Hopefully we'll have an impact and it'd be less this year that are related to fentanyl and xylazine overdoses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Joe, so same question to you in your neck of the woods. What's
Sure. I just want to mention one thing. I think there's a correlation, as Jermonica said, the age has gone up slightly, but there seems to be a correlation with that in COVID. A lot of people retired early or were laid off, and so there seems to be a direct correlation with being idle and drug use. Mm-hmm. So I think COVID exacerbated that issue. Now, mm-hmm. In New York, I mean, obviously we have a little bit of a different issue, and I'm speaking for Manhattan, New York City, the 5. Not the whole state, because you have such rural areas here. I know very little about those. But in New York, you have two completely different worlds. It's like a tale of two cities. You've got people that are completely broke and they'll break into cars to get drug money. And then you have people I live down here in Battery Parks in Tribeca, which is a wealthy area. And so you got kids that get an allowance of $600 to $1,000 a week. Mm-hmm. And the parents have no idea. I mean, These are major lawyers, major bankers from Goldman Sachs. And I talk to them here because I live in my building. And my kid has been depressed. Baba, you think he's on drugs? Oh, no, not my kid. So, and then one day he could wake up dead, this is the problem. So I think we have to, as I said to Jermonica earlier today, segmentation of this market is very complex because even like the gay, let's say, look at the gay, all of the gay and lesbian centers in New York are giving out tests. They're giving them out because you go to any event. I mean, Delaware gives them out now for free in bars. You go to a bar and there are fish balls on the bar. They're just giving them out. And the major state and county sponsored events in Delaware have bags of them hanging when you walk into the event. Here, take one, because they know that you're going to shoot up in the stall. And so the biggest telltale to me is Washington, you've been to Manhattan, of course, Washington Square Park, right? Okay. It used to be open 24 hours a day. And every night I go for a long 5-mile walk. Okay. A couple of months ago I went and it was after midnight, it was locked up and there's like a ton of cops around it. So I said, what's going on? Because we need a period of 4 hours to clean up the needles. And now it's a wealthy area, NYU, right? I mean, this is not you would expect them to say. So it's a tale of two cities. It's different approaches. And even the private schools here think it's not a big issue, whereas the public schools are more willing here to address it. But it is a huge issue in a private school, even worse at times. We just got a memo in my fancy apartment building that they found needles in the stairwell. Okay. Well, all right. I mean, what a surprise, right? You have a lot of money. You have the kids idle all summer, and they can't do it at home in their apartment, so they go in the stairwell. So I think there's many faces to this problem. Prisons are a major issue with OD in prison because they can get it in there somehow, and they're dying like crazy. So I think we have to look at all these different market segments, whether it's prison. VA is another big one. There's so many veterans that are addicted right now.
Right.
With PTSD and the rest. And so, but again, they have counseling programs. So we have to train the counselors because as Jermonica and I were discussing today, you don't know what you don't know. If they don't know the tests are available. And then the second thing, I think it's a racetrack issue. You want to keep them alive until maybe you can do something else to help them. And it was interesting. I just got back from a trip to Canada and Canadian Rockies. It was beautiful. And the woman next to me was a psychiatric nurse from Maine. And I asked her, what's harm reduction to you? And she didn't talk about this. She said, harm reduction to me is all of the peripheral harm reduction. It's the families that get split up and the people who get disenfranchised from their families. It is the domestic violence. Is brutal. She goes to these things. She had this whole penumbra of things that we don't even think of as harm reduction because the harm is well beyond the drug. The harm is so far beyond it, and they lose their jobs. They lose everything, right? So I think that it's such a large, complicated issue that our job is to keep them alive, and hopefully they can find a program that would help them. I don't want people to think that harm reduction is to keep you alive until you die of a natural death. I mean, yes, to some people, they're never going to get off of it, and that's true. But I'm hoping that some other intervention would come along to we could keep them alive, especially younger kids, right? They should be able to, as they get older, hopefully reduce or eliminate drug use, But it's not easy. I was at a major primary care clinical meeting, and they have different tracks. And I went to the track on vaping and versus smoking. And there's a lot of bad data for vaping, but you can't get people off of it. I mean, and now just at that meeting, they were showing that they have, smokeless, odorless vaping. You could put it in your hand and be on a plane and you can vape all day. It's ruining your lungs. So these things are very difficult to get off of, right? And so we have to admit, and I think that's one of the major tenets of harm reduction. Some people will just never get off of it, but we would like to keep them alive. But my theory is with AI, with lots of other things that we could bring to the table, I'm hoping we can help people find the right programs, the right interventions, even help parents find the right information early on if they think the child or may be on some type of drugs, and not scold them, but work with them to try to understand, let them understand that we're worried that you may die and we don't want you to die. So this is It's a whole different world today than it's ever been. And the last thing I want to say is the reason that xylazine is becoming so popular is that it's an animal tranquilizer. Right. And because it's an animal tranquilizer, it's readily available, dirt cheap as a generic, right? So if you have to worry about things like heroin, you have to go to the fields, the poppies, it's raining, not enough rain, not enough irrigation, bugs, you hear all kind of problems. So now you get in your bathtub from China, the precursors, you mix it up practically, and you have it. So it's so cheap. And so what they're doing now is interesting in Philly. Philly gives out a quarterly report. I don't know if you have a copy, we'll send it to you, of the ratio of fentanyl to xylazine in street drugs during when they bring them in. And used to be fentanyl was here and xylazine is here. Now fentanyl is like 1/10. You may have 10 milligrams of this or micrograms, and you may have 100 or 1,000 of xylazine because it's so cheap, so easy to get. And also there's a ban from China on exporting fentanyl. There's no ban on diversion of xylazine. It's a ban on it, but people get around it, right? Easily. So these are, I think, very, very complex issues that really need to be looked at.
Absolutely. Jermonica, let's talk a little bit about your experiences in sort of real world situations, because you're the distributor of this product. You recently, and there's this really nice piece here in Philly about you and the organization and your work with the lieutenant governor of the state. Walk us through what's happening, the rollout, what you've been experiencing, things you're learning, things that worry you. Take us through that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've learned more about this space in the last 6 months or so than I've ever known probably in my life. And once again, it goes back to really wanting to try to make as much of an impact and difference as we truly can. Savad is a family-owned company, family-owned business. Our principal owner, Lindsay Davis, has over 40 plus years in entrepreneurial experience. So for me, it's really personal. It's really personal to be here in a state such as Delaware, small state, the first state, and really try to make as much difference as we truly can. So it was important for us to have strategic partnerships with individuals such as, Joe and Kevin from DSG, as well as trying to form relationships with our local and state government officials. And I will say the benefit of Delaware being such a small state is that we can really get in contact with our government and state officials relatively quickly, so the speed and agility at which we were able to operate was very key and critical in really trying to do this pilot and launch this product. As Joe mentioned, we have been in discussions with the state, I want to say starting around the summertime of last year. And through our various different partnerships or various manufacturers, we were able to bring to them a fentanyl-only test strip. And at that time, we also were working on technology where we were able to test and also keep track of where were the locations, central to having a high presence of fentanyl in those areas through technology that we developed. And at that time, with meeting with the Lieutenant Governor's office around the fall of last year, they said, fentanyl is out there. We know it's out there. We're already getting, test strips for fentanyl. We have various different harm reduction strategies already in place. We have Narcan distribution sites. We have things that are currently in place that can try to combat, the fentanyl crisis. They said, however, xylazine is on the rise. It is showing prevalent in 90% of the street drugs in Philadelphia. We have to do something. So it was at that time we went back to the drawing board with Kevin and Joe from DSG and said, let's come up with a solution. So through R&D and working with the manufacturer, we were able to come up with a solution. So we immediately, took that once it got all the validations from the FDA certified lab and is DEA registered and certified as well. We took those results and that data back to the Lieutenant Governor's office, and they did not hesitate to jump on it and said, we need to we need to do this. We need to do this as quickly as possible. So it was very important here, for us to start here in the first state, here in our state where we're headquartered, recognizing the numbers in Delaware, recognizing the uptick in where we were trending. It was very important for us to come up with a solution. And it was just a perfect combination of working, with state and local officials, health organizations and officials in a private company like Survive to come up with a real solution, to collaborate together, to show how private and public entities can really come together and come up with a solution to help combat this opioid crisis. The pilot was very successful. They went out there, boots on the ground. The Delaware Behavioral Health Consortium went out there, boots on the ground on July 3rd, the day before July 4th, on a Monday. There was coverage in the news about that as well, with them handing out the test strips. Our test strips were created with safety in mind. 3 is key. So if there are 3 red lines on the test strip, that indicates that there is no presence of fentanyl and or xylazine. So it was very important to get that messaging out to the community, for them to test their drugs, to understand how the test functions and how it operates, understand and interpret the results of the test. The results within 5 minutes. So it was very important, for us to get those tests in the hands of ones that we're actively using as soon as possible. So now, our goal from there is to work with all of the other surrounding, states and cities, Philadelphia, Baltimore, New Jersey, New York, some of these other areas that are looking to come up with a solution as part of their harm reduction strategies as well to combat this crisis. So now we'll leverage what we were able to do in Delaware. We had some excellent coverage. Very good results from the pilot. Delaware is working with us now on now rolling out and putting into production, going live, since the pilot was a success, now actually going live with the test results. And now this will become a part of their harm reduction efforts going forward. Now, we can focus on this one combination test. Any other test that's on the market now only singularly tests for either fentanyl and or xylazine. And like Jill mentioned, it's not likely that someone that's in active addiction or is about to use will test the drug twice. So it's very important that individuals understand that this test can replace, any test that's currently on the market that only tests for one of those drugs individually. And I also want to mention that there is funding available for these states to buy these tests. There was a $56 billion settlement as part of the opioid settlement fund, where the big pharma companies had to pay a settlement for, not being fully transparent or their role in the opioid crisis. So all of the states that participated in that lawsuit were granted a certain amount of allotted funds that they need to spend as part of harm reduction, as well as abatement and other, strategies that they have in place as well. So there is funds available that's dedicated and allocated to programs such as this, such as our Harm Stopper program, the iPortal, and the testing. So our goal now is, we've already launched it in Delaware. It was successful. So now how do we get out there to the rest of the nation? Xylazine is currently present in 48 of the 50 states, the DEA reported, so how do we get these test strips now into the right hands of all the various different states, so we can truly, truly make an impact and save lives.
Awesome.
I just want to say that one of the reasons Delaware works so well is that they have the opportunity and the thought to actually set up an opioid settlement division directly under the lieutenant governor. And because of that, and she happens to be a nurse. And so it worked out great. You have a healthcare professional that we could work with who really understands the issues. Now, in other states, it's buried in other layers of the government. So it's not as easy to get to the right person. But certainly in Delaware, the mechanism was excellent. And because we worked with Susan, and she is in charge of the entire fund, and she reports directly to the lieutenant governor. There's nobody in between. And so she's one of her direct reports. So that made it very easy to get information up and down. The lieutenant governor came to our offices. So, I mean, you would not get that in other states where they're way buried down. And that made it that really helped. The other thing is that because Delaware is a small state, they're number 3 in the country per capita in deaths. So per capita, not total deaths. So that's a very high number for a small state. And so they have a goal, and it's very much just like in pharmaceuticals, treat to goal. You want to have a goal, and you have to get to the goal, and then you have to have a strategy and tactics to get to your goal. And so their goal is to actually look at that number and get it down, not up, but down. So maybe down to 4, maybe down to 5th or 10th, because there are 50 states, right? So that gives us a way to work with them towards helping them with a very tangible, measurable goal. And that's really, as a scientist, I like measurable things. Like something I could actually say it's working, right? As opposed to taking pictures of people on the streets and saying, I think it's working, right? So I like that. So, and every state now is ranked. And so any state that we would go into, we would be able to help them get their ranking down. Then, of course, when they all get down to the bottom, there's going to be splitting hairs, right? They're all going to be exactly the same, but they're going to be like 2 off, and now, oh, you're 48. But my goal, of course, would be to get them to get down, and that's a very important factor. The other thing about the settlement fund, I think that's critical, is that the reason that only 48 states were involved, not 50, the attorneys general had to sue. They had to be a joint plaintiff in the lawsuit. If they weren't a joint plaintiff, then they don't get any of the money, and so that's the reason. And then the allocations, I'm not sure exactly. It's a little complicated how they're allocating the funds, but you had to be in it to win it. There was no other way about it. And just so other people realize that the money didn't come just from pharmaceutical companies. It did. It came from Johnson & Johnson, Purdue, all the big ones that were heavily involved. But it also came from some of the large drug distributors, because they were also heavily involved, as you know. I don't want to name any right now, but they were very heavily involved in hyper promoting. As a matter of fact, in our research, we found that there was one small pharmacy in a small town somewhere in the South, I won't mention names, where the population was like 600, and there was 32,000 opioid scripts a month going through that pharmacy by mail order. And so, and when the HSS OIG, Office of Inspector General, said, listen, I mean, you're supposed to have triggers built in, and you're supposed to, something should flag something and say what's going on. They said, we didn't think that was excessive. I mean, that's the kind of answers you would get, right? I mean, that would be like 500 of these per hour for everybody. It's really crazy. But when there's money and power involved, that's what happens. And
wild situation.
You got to be a little bit careful. One last thing about us is that because we are also in the IT, we have a couple hundred developers. If anybody needs customization for anything, we're certainly there to do it. If they need data interfacing through APIs or anything, we're there to do it. And we also use a lot of generative AI to generate multilingual training programs or whatever, without actually having to hire people. Because one of the things we've learned early on, and this is something Jermonica is really just catching on to, is that when you do something initially and no one's done it before, you get a lot of feedback. And you want to change things, you want to correct things. Well, if you have to have voiceover artists come back in every time to make changes, it becomes extremely expensive and slow. Sometimes they're not available. They're on another project in Australia, and you can't get the same voice. So by using, some type of a computer-generated voice, which is what we're doing now, we're using Amazon Poly and a few others. We're able to translate almost anything on the fly right now. So if comes back and says we want to look at the Vietnamese community, if we want to look at the Filipino Tagalog community, whatever you want to look at, we could, within a few days, translate the entire thing and the voice. Excellent. So arcane training videos can be done in any language. As a matter of fact, on our test website, which if do you have a packet, one of the packet, we can send you one. Or the barcode. We can just put the barcode and you can just scan it and email. You'll see that we have a little training video on Narcan, which is required by the state of Delaware. You need to They take a little assessment at the end before they'll give it to you. But anyway, we now have it in 5 languages. We did it in about 5 minutes. We did it in Hindi, we did it in Chinese, we did it in Spanish, English. I forgot what the other language was. But it's amazing nowadays with the technology, we could do things so inexpensively and quickly that you could never do even 5 years ago.
Mhm.
So, and I want people to realize that we want to make that available. Even we have a very good distribution center, and so does Savad. But if somebody wanted custom packaging, language inserts, whatever they would need, we're ready. As opposed to the big guys, like some of the big pharma companies, you'd have to order 500,000 or 1 million to get that done. I think our minimum is probably 2,000, 3,000, and we'll be glad to put an insert in for you. So we really want to address smaller communities, specialized communities. Chinatown in New York, a lot of people don't speak any English still. I go to AT&T in Chinatown, the entire conversation except mine is in Cantonese. I mean, I'm the only one who doesn't know what the heck they're talking about. But, and so that's an important issue. I know when we were working, or still working a lot on weight loss products, that became a major issue in areas, even like in Puerto Rico, they really wanted everything in Spanish. And I didn't think they would even want weight loss products in Puerto Rico. It's a big thing now, like drugs like Wegovy. So, so I mean, little things like that can make all the difference in whether or not something is adopted or not by a particular community, right?
Speaking, Joe, you bring up the topic of customization, and early on you walked us through sort of the regulatory clearances and authorizations and all that stuff that you have to work through as you develop these different products. But if God forbid Jermonica comes to you, 9 months from now and say, hey, fentanyl and xylazine, this is the issue, but there's X, Y, and Z now coming online, bad things. What does it take for the 2-test strip to become a 5-test strip ultimately, or whatever it may? How quickly can you customize because the bad stuff, there's going to be more bad stuff coming at some point. I guess it's the weird trend you pointed out.
It's going to be what it will take was Jermonica's first trip to China, and so that she'd love that. But when you do any kind of multi-analyte anything, you got to look at a lot of factors. And one of them, of course, is the user experience and usability. If you have too many lines on a test, people get confused. Right. So you got to be very careful how you do that. So there are definitely options on that. You may have a 2-sided test strip or something where one side you have 2 lines and on the other side you have 2 lines. But to put lots of lines from a usability perspective is going to bring on error in reading it for sure. That's number 1. Number 2, you have to look at another factor. Since when you put multi-analytes in, you have to make sure that the analytes are not in any way interacting with each other, so that if they bind to each other, when they get to the site on the test strip, they may not bind and you may not see the line. So what you have to do is, if you're just doing a single one, it's quite simple. The more complicated you have, then you have the permutations and combinations of all that you have to test, like high level of one and a lower level of one, and see if you have any artifacts from that. And then if you have 3 of them, you have to have 3 times 2 times 6 permutations, and the testing becomes more complex. And then the other thing you got to test is, which is funny, and people don't really realize it, and that is for any kind of drug that would interfere. So normally, let's say, for example, you're testing heroin. Well, does heroin interfere with the test? That it's a third element. It's another. Right. Now we don't have, it's not an analyte of ours, but it could be an analyte if you're analyzing for it, right? And so one of the things you have to do, and the testing becomes complex, because if you've got a mixture of heroin and meth and this and that all in one container, who knows what's in that little mixture that you have, right? And then, so it's not so much developing the test. I think we could do that pretty quickly. It's making sure, and the other thing is, the lower limit of detection, or cutoff, as they call it. I mean, in the past, the lower limit of detection was an important factor. Today, it's less important, because if you look, and you'll see the data I send you, you're talking about 500 times the lower limit of detection now for xylazine. So who cares if your lower limit is 200 nanograms or 300 nanograms, 500. If you've got, 10 grams, it just doesn't matter anymore, right? So you have to also look at the state of the art or the situation in the future, because if the concentrations are very high, you might be able to get a test on the market more quickly, because you're not really looking to detect a very small amount anymore, because no one's putting small amounts in there anymore. So you have to look at, there are a lot of factors, but normally I would say from soup to nuts, to replace an analyte. Let's say fentanyl goes out of favor and they have xylazine and something else. To replace an analyte, maybe 8 weeks to get the first test in. It's very fast. It's very fast. And then unless you have a snag. I mean, of course, you could run to a snag where they come back and they say, well, we can't mix them. So as I said, we would try to put them back to back, so that the flow would be separate, the laminar flow would be separate. So there's lots of ways around it, but you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. But as I said, we are working directly with European labs, and they usually, the funny thing is, they usually find it 6 months to a year before we get it in quantities. And as Jermonica knows, the standard statement in Delaware is it comes to Philly first, right? And then we get it. So you can see the path: Europe, sort of Philly, and then Delaware. So so we will know about it. And as I said, the good thing about most of these big labs in Europe is that they open their lab up at least once a month to anybody to bring your drugs in, and they keep a sample, so they're always on top of it, and they have very sophisticated equipment, so it'll analyze the whole spectrum of everything that's in it. And when Philly's doing the same thing, so when we send you that, you'll see that you'll have a complete analysis right down to the smallest quantity of what's in there, and then you can see trending. And that's the other thing we're doing now, is we're doing trending with predictive analytics. So if we start to see another one coming up a little bit, we adjust for noise and low end values, and then eventually we'll take a look and see, do we think this is going to be something to take a look at in the future? And you can only do that by using real street drugs. There's no other way to do it. And that's why Delaware is going to start doing it too. I think they're going to actually start to do the same type of testing that Philly is doing, maybe once a month, get some drugs. So that data is invaluable to us, because we can't get drugs. I mean, yes, I could go to Washington Square and buy some, but that's the N of 1. I mean, what am I? From a statistical perspective, that's what can I project from 1? Nothing, right? That's the problem. So
got it. Yeah.
So, but one thing, we have a high capacity. People aren't going to believe us, but we have a capacity of 90 million tests a month. We're one of the highest capacities in the world. So that's multiple lines. A single line will do 1 million a day. So we could do 30 million a month with a single production line in China. So we're set to go. I mean, if there's no way that we can't, and we're using very fast couriers like DHL. Everything's coming air right now. Nothing's coming by ocean freight. So we could get. From the time we placed the order, the other thing we did was we bought a lot of components, because the packet itself is biodegradable. And so there's a lead time on that. So we bought a ton of packets. They're sitting already in the factory. So from the time we place the order to the time the manufacturer is 3 days. We can get 3 million in 3 days. And then the shipping time is 5 days. So there's no way we can't keep up with the demand right now. There's just no way.
Jermonica, what should we be looking out for in the coming months, as far as you, Savad, and every time there's an article I see that has something to do with xylazine and fentanyl, you're mentioned in it, which is great. And but anything else coming up for the rest of the year? Conferences that you may be presenting at, other meetings, initiatives, anything else on the Harm Stopper front, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're using this time period now to really leverage what we were able to do in the press a couple of weeks ago, to springboard ahead in some of the other, states and things of that nature. I mean, ironically, during the same timing, the U.S. Senate passed the Tranq Research Act as well. That was led by Senators Ted Cruz and Peter Welch. Where this bill was aimed to increase understanding of xylazine, its effects on the human body, develop new tests for its detection and establish better resources for communities affected by its use. So our goal at this point now is to work hand in hand with our government officials and current harm reduction programs that are already in place, and really try to get the awareness and the education, out there as much as possible. We do have some upcoming meetings scheduled in Washington, DC, that are on the docket. So we're looking forward, to those. We're looking forward to continue to leverage our relationships here with the Lieutenant Governor, with Senator Coons, and our congressperson, here in Delaware as well, looking to leverage those relationships, and then try to do webinars and try to get as much education as possible. Like Joe and I were talking earlier today, you don't know what you don't know. So a lot of states may not even be aware that they have this issue. So just that awareness and to set that light bulb off and say, oh, wow, we should be focusing on xylazine, as well, and get this test strip and the iPortal in possession of as many states as possible. Hopefully you'll see me on some more appearances locally and nationally. And this isn't just something that just plagues us here in the US. So we're working, with other countries as well. This is just a biggest problem in Canada and Europe and some of the other places as well. So really just trying to stretch as far as we can go and get as many ones on board as possible to help them, with their strategies that they have in place. The idea is to save lives. I mean, it's just so unfortunate that none of us, none of our families are exempt from this problem. I mean, you're seeing a lot more celebrities, today with their children, young children that are dying because, as Joe mentioned, their systems are naive to these, to these drugs. So just getting that awareness and education out there, so a parent, don't have to deal with the loss of their child, a child dealing with the loss of a parent that could have been prevented. They're called accidental overdoses for a reason. They're not taking these drugs with the intention to die. Many of ones that are taking drugs started with legit reasons for needing some type of narcotic, in situations for surgeries, treatment, or some, form of ailment that they may be dealing with. A lot of it is used for recreational use as well. Folks are just experimenting and things of that nature. But a lot of folks really have a lot of issues, underlying issues that they're trying to address. They don't want to die. So our idea is that we can just get as much education awareness out there and reduce the harm. That's the idea, reduce the harm, allow them to make a different decision, without the stigma of someone knowing that they're taking drugs or may have an issue. The idea is to ultimately get them to recovery. That's what we want. But if you're not alive, you cannot wake up another day to make a different decision. So hopefully this test strip will allow individuals to make a different decision that will ultimately save their lives. So our goal over these next 6 weeks, 6 months, is to get that messaging out to all of the key stakeholders, within the various different states, in the communities that are impacted and plagued by this opioid crisis, and really just try to educate, bring awareness, and save lives.
Yep. It's refreshing hearing you talk about not just obviously your regional work, but the fact you're getting back to DC, because again, as I said at the beginning, at least what I remember growing up, there was big issues, right? It was the Cold War and drugs, and they were the top of mind. Nowadays, I don't know where drugs sits in DC, but it's nice that you're getting back there and not only working with the states, but getting in front of these senators and congressmen. So I applaud you for that, Jermonica. I think that's awesome.
Thank you. And just to add on to that point, I had a conversation with Senator Coons a couple of weeks ago at an event that I was at, and I was explaining to him our, test strips and what it is that we're trying to do here at Savard. And he said, you know what? He just stopped, and he said, I'm in DC majority of the week, majority of the month, I'm in DC in meetings. He said, none of that matters when you talk about somebody actually losing their life because of taking a drug that has fentanyl or xylazine. And, you know, his wife also volunteers with Bethany, Lieutenant Governor Bethany Hall Long, in the distribution of the tests and things of that nature. But it just was so refreshing to hear him say that, because he spends most of his time in Washington. And I know with so much going on in the world today, but to hear him personally say that none of this matters if someone has to bury a child, a grandchild, a parent, you know, or someone related to this opioid crisis.
Yep.
Okay, time to add one thing.
Joe, you take it.
Two things I think are really important. One of them is, you know, xylazine has no reversal agent.
Yeah.
And so, right. And so the test strips are also important for like EMTs, because when they get there, they can, if they see they have xylazine at a high percentage, then they have to give respiratory support. The Narcan will knock out the fentanyl portion if there's any, but not that. So that's really important that people realize. The second thing is xylazine causes massive amounts of wounds, open wounds. I don't know if you've seen them.
Yep, I've seen the videos.
Leading to amputations. Yeah. So again, this is a very serious problem, and people really, especially, I mean, if you're already experienced and you have wounds and you inject into your wound, and nothing I can do about that. But kids should not start out with wounds that don't heal. That is I worked on that at J&J. That is a big problem, like pressure ulcers in hospitals. Very difficult to treat, and it's a big problem. So I think that's number one. Now, the other thing I want to mention is, so many states are spending so much money on multiple websites, complicated. I'm hoping that our iPortal can become like a national resource, because since we're using conversational and we know where you are, it's only going to give you information unless you tell it to ignore your location. Conversationally, you just say, I know I'm in Delaware, ignore it, and I want information for Seattle, Washington, it'll give you that. But what I'm saying is, I would like them to try to cut their budgets on all that stuff, and use a substitution model, take that money and put it towards the centralized repository of really good information, because it has both local information right down to the city and national information. It has everything that you want in it. And a single resource like that would be so fantastic for a person, especially if you're in active addiction. You don't have time to look at 400 different websites. And as you know, many of these states have farmed out or outsourced a lot of these functions. So you click on a link and it takes you somewhere else, a completely separate site. And now you have to navigate the other site to find out where you can get Narcan or whatever. And then you have to, then it takes you to Google Maps. And then you have a list. It's just crazy. People are going to do all of that. And so I'm hoping that the iPortal, especially now that generative AI is really on top of our list of things to do. We're using it a lot in pharma now to answer questions for medical information. The doctor calls up and says, and we have guardrails on it. So if you call up and you say, or a patient calls and says, I skipped a dose, what do? It knows exactly what to say. I took two by mistake, and my dog ate it. It says 911, call 911 or your local poison control, but it knows, what to say. On the other hand, if it says, I know the product is off label, but I am going to use it on a 16-year-old kid and it's only approved for 21 and older, it immediately routes you to a PhD or MD to answer the question. So we have escalation built in. I'm hoping that this will be the standard. So if you have a very difficult question or a doctor calls, especially in the situation of, let's say, neonatal or postpartum addicted children, and they have questions about how to manage them, those are difficult questions. And you may need to talk to a neonatologist so we can route that for you. I mean, I really want this to be and it doesn't have to be a person licensed in that state. They're not giving out, they're talking to another doctor. So it's peer-to-peer. It's just like when we have peer-to-peer meetings, you don't have to be licensed. You're not treating the patient. You're just giving information to another doctor. So I think if we can have a resource that can handle everything from, postpartum addiction to how to manage wounds, with xylazine, to how to recognize using the test strips, how to recognize potentially fatal combinations of drugs. I think a single resource is the way to go. Is really the way to go. So, and also it's available for school systems if they want to customize it. Let's say university, we can put a login in it, and you can find on-campus resources that you would not if you didn't have the student ID number. So we do all that stuff for doctors. We do all that for big pharma companies. Why can't we? And that's the thing. We have done so many massive projects, multi-billion-dollar projects that we didn't do exclusively, but part of for all the big companies. We have all this technology. So I'm saying, why can't we now use this technology in an area which is very low tech right now? There's almost no technology involved in this area. So it's just website after website information and downloads. And no, we don't need that anymore. We should give the answer that they want, point them in the right direction, and be able to escalate it if it's necessary to someone who can answer the question for you when you need to know it. And that's going to be our long-term goal. And that's what I'm hoping even this part of the opioid settlement fund money may be available for that. And clearly, if you look at Senator Cruz's bill, there's money available for something like that. And the states will save a fortune because instead of having all these websites and and maintaining them, we use advanced APIs and screen scraping. So whatever information is available, we get it in real time to the extent we can. So we don't have to update it. And most of the time, we don't have to update anything. It's updated all the time. And that's our goal. Just like we do, like, for example, with pharmaceutical companies, we get over 200 million script data a week from a company called IQVIA, and it's current data. I mean, that's it. We don't have to do anything for it, and then we analyze it for the pharmaceutical companies. But we don't have to go fetch it. We don't have to call pharmacies up and do anything. It all comes into a centralized source, and that's our goal: is to try to get this stuff centralized. And even if you're like Delaware, where they have very specific mobile dates, where something will be there on Tuesday and something will be there on Thursday, we have that data now. So we know Tuesday, and we're going to tell you it's in your backyard. Or next Tuesday, it'll be in your backyard. And so it's all in one place. I think that would be a fantastic addition. And because it's generative AI, we can add information to it, new information, like you said, new drugs, new adulterants that are coming out. We can add that right in there, put information up into the AI model quickly. And you ask a question, are there any new adulterants coming out? And it would know the answer immediately. You don't have to try to go to 50 states and have them all update their 50 websites, which could take forever and cost a mint. And that's, I think so. Really, to me, of course, the test is critical, but to me, the information, getting the truth out, letting people know exactly what xylazine is, what the issues are associated with it, that because a lot of people I talk to, they think Narcan reverses it. They have no idea that Narcan is not going to do anything. And so education is a critical component of this.
Absolutely. And it's, again, it's refreshing hearing both of your stories and seeing the potential here. And again, not just product, but as you were saying, information and knowledge, and which is power, and just reintroducing this to the world that there's a problem out here, but there are solutions. And I think it's just so elegant, not just seeing it from both of you, but that you're entrepreneurial startups thinking about this and really making things happen. So I mean, I'm just so excited for both of you and your collaboration, and just really wishing you the best with all of it as you continue to move it forward and expand the programs. For everybody that is going to be listening to this particular episode of our show across the various podcast networks, or watching on our YouTube channel, again, you've been listening to Jermonica Boardley, President and CEO, Savad Diagnostic Medical Group, Joseph Scrocco, President and CEO, Diagnostic Solutions Group, doing really amazing work to move forward harm reduction during this terrible opioid crisis that we find ourselves in. Jermonica, Joe, I want to thank you both for taking the time out of your schedules to come talk about these issues, educate us for a little while. Obviously, thank you for what you both do. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for so many people out there via what you do. A really great story. And
thank you for the opportunity.
Let's get together. I would love to tell you a little bit more about what's going on. If you get that Delaware, I'm sure Jermonica will help you for sure.
Absolutely. Be well, both of you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Bye.